Good to go.
That's the video golden box.
That's the trap. Yeah, your center frame if you're in that.
Well, thank you for having us here tonight. And since we're batting cleanup, hopefully we can bring the team in with everybody. I'm Charles Frederick. This is Paul Hegman. We're two of the members of our team. We also have Caitlin Milius. She is a civil engineer, especially in stormwater management. And Ruben Shaw, who is a graduate landscape architecture student at Kent State University that also contributed to this. What I'd like to present to you today is where we are right now with what we're proposing, and it is within the category of green infrastructure, and we're trying to do something slightly different with it. So I'd like to draw your attention to these four images up here, and kind of talk about the hydrologic cycle that typically happens, and what people kind of envision or how they engage in. So I use this simple little thing that we all learned: rain, rain, go away, come back another day. Because usually when the storm clouds start brewing, what do we all do? We think about changing our plans if we're going outside for some reason, right? If we're at an event, so this is the Penguins playing Robert Morris back in September. If we're at an event, we may stay there, but if it's like rain delayed or anything like that, we're going to jump underneath the canopies, we're going to wait this thing out, or we're going to possibly think about going home on this because it just may not be worth staying there for that. And Youngstown State did win this, a thumping they put on them. And what typically happens is that we engineer the environment. It's all positive drainage. It's all hidden. It all disappears as soon as possible. And there's something that I call the magical water that is really missing because of that. It releases from our consciousness when something like that happens. So it disappears. And in this area, what happens is it finds its way to the Mahoning River. Again, most people don't kind of realize that cycle that's so important. So what we want to do is talk about that as a lost opportunity, but change it to something that's gained for us because we want to explore the hydraulic cycle a little bit more. So typically, the hydraulic cycle, you think about soil, you think about vegetation, you think about swales, you think about landform. All this kind of works together, and it's very visible upon the landscape. And mostly as it collects, it goes back into the natural environment as much as possible. What we do in the engineering cycle is we, with precision, go and we change that. It's still a closed cycle, but it's all the pipes, all the drain inlets, all the catch basins that make this disappear. And we change it a little bit. We don't get as much infiltration. We get more runoff from there. So we're looking to kind of change that as much as possible and artistically explore what another possibility is. So there's three basic elements to our concept. We want symbolic collection, and I'll talk about the site in a moment. We want to express the complexity of the engineered system, and we want to celebrate water in some way. So the site that we've chosen is the Phelps Street steps right here. We think it's important, and we think it's kind of really critical of our site selection because of the connection with YSU and the downtown area. So we're really kind of happy about exploring this site. And we're at the second wall, kind of this green area right here, that we're mostly exploring with this planting area right down here. So the Erie Street, or the Erie building is right over here. Phelps going down into downtown, it's just a little further. If, again, we think about the hydraulic cycle, we started to diagram what happens on this site. In the last couple of years, the site was fixed in terms of the steps. We have a catch basin up here that's rock lined. We've got a 84-inch sewer that's down below. And in between, we have some rock walls. I think the stairs are pretty nice, the way it allows you to linger at certain times. And what we want to do is provide that opportunity for somebody to linger and kind of look at something. So we have the hydraulic cycle that kind of works right there, but we're looking to change that, and we're looking to celebrate that as much as possible. We're starting to look at some sense of materiality within some of our concepts. So this is traditionally what we've used for stormwater management. I don't think we're looking at all those materials, but it is something that we just want to be aware of. So we want to kind of express this hydraulic cycle in a different way. We want to capture some water, and we want to celebrate it in my opinion, a very magical way. Paul's going to discuss the concept for right now, and then we'll finish it up with a discussion.
Sure. So Charles gave sort of the background and the lay of the land. I'm going to go a little bit over the actual details and the ideas behind the project itself, the intervention that we're looking at here. As Charles said at the end, the steps themselves have a nice setup to allow you to linger, but other than the sort of zigzag form of them, there's not much on that particular site that's active. It doesn't allow you to grab your attention, or there's nothing that wants to keep you there. So this intervention, at its core, is, because this is an NEA grant, an artistic site, an artistic project, but it aims to touch on three main concepts. The hydrologic cycle that Charles discussed, which currently in most cities and even outside in suburban and rural areas, we bury underground, we hide it, we take the water somewhere else. So this looks at examining that cycle, but also unearthing it and bringing that cycle of collecting water, putting it into pipes and tubes, and taking it somewhere to do something. We bring that up to the surface. Because we're now pulling that to the surface, we have the opportunity to explore, in a kind of educational and interpretive way, some different elements of that system. So there are a lot of different components that go together with that, from the surface catchment that you see, the manholes, to the systems that take it away, different materiality, different textures. So now that this thing has risen to the surface, and you can appreciate the real complexity of these systems, we can actually examine some of those interesting aspects that otherwise are hidden. And then the final part is that ability to use what we've collected, to use what has been gathered, to affect some artistic and meaningful activity. And I'm going to jump down to the bottom before I kind of go through all the steps. That activity, that motion, that dynamic component is what we've created the name from, the Floralis Hydrologica, a functional, mechanical, kinetic sculpture that at most times during dry spells is this sort of dormant flower head, just sort of laying over on its side, petals a little bit closed. But as the water gathers in these catchment systems, what we're creating as these sort of contrived lily pads, as the water gathers and is funneled through these tubes, it ends up going into a larger basin at the bottom. That then can act in a mechanical way to activate or actuate some mechanics to allow this thing during a rain event, and even beyond a rain event, to perk up, pull its head up, and open the petals. And this thing, we're expecting it to be something like 6 feet tall. So it's a large enough piece that's going to catch your eye also from Phelps Street, where there's continued improvement and investment there. So folks that are dining, folks that are going out, may see this thing at the end of the street, and it may draw them to the site. Of course, there's also the connection between YSU and downtown, where people are going to pass by. One of the concepts here, because this is an examination of what is a normal stormwater system, detainment, what we'd like to see in the mechanics, which we are still, in your brief, we have some sort of proof of concept mechanics, but that is one thing that needs to be finalized as this project moves forward, is the exact mechanics of making this thing work. But what we'd like to see is actually to have that piece be a very slow-moving kinetic sculpture, so that even after a rain event, even after it has perked its head up, it may take 36 hours for that final catchment system to drain and slowly go down. So it's not something that you have to be standing outside in the rain to experience, but something that as you pass by, every time you pass by this, if you're going to class, if you're going to work, if you're walking up the stairs once a week, you may see this flower, this sculpture, this intervention in some different state than the last time you were there. So it's a constantly kinetic, constantly interesting piece.
And that's one of the principles for stormwater management, is holding it for a while and then releasing over time. Typically it's 24 to 36 hours. So we want to play with that and let everybody know that we are truly designing this as a stormwater management system.
Right. Yeah, so all the basic elements of those three concepts, the stormwater management, the hydrologic cycle, are captured in this piece. But in a way that allows you to act on something. In this case, that action is this flower. We go into the budget too a little bit. And again, the handout that you guys have received has that breakdown. $20,000 is a wonderful grant. In the end, you're limited in what you can really do. So we really tried to pay attention to the materials and how to have the most bang for our buck. So a lot of these materials, this theme that we're working with of pipes and tubing, these things are, for lack of a better term, off the shelf. You know, these are everyday construction items that you can get. The price is constant. We know how to anticipate for that. We've used that to the maximum extent possible to bring that out of the ground and allow that to be a visually appealing element. There are, however, some rather complicated mechanical pieces. So those pieces would still have to be, the engineering would have to be finalized and the fabrication enacted. So we've put some larger numbers in our budget for those elements. In addition to this, you know, making sure that this project can come in at the appropriate schedule, July 31st being done, the materials, the sort of phasing of this allows us to do a lot of that piping that's easy up front while the fabrication is going on, so that we can then install that at the end and make sure that the project schedule aligns with the needs of this grant and this project. So we've looked at that. I'm going to touch briefly on the last page of this, but only briefly. The other thing that we've tossed around, and this was just, you know, as we're coming up with these ideas and refining them, all these other things percolate up. As you get excited about this little idea and this idea, but eventually you know you have to narrow them down. We dedicated a page to some other ideas that popped up that could use this concept but adapt it in different ways. Rather than the hydrologic cycle, you may be looking at different stages of water. So there's the second one on here. We've taken the Latin for ice and crystals, Floralis crystallos, and thought maybe somewhere else in the city, in the wintertime, when it's not raining and this is less active, maybe there's a way to create a really interesting intervention or sculptural piece that uses that ice in some interesting way and maybe extrudes it. Not getting into details, just sort of thinking of interesting ideas. Floralis lux, is there a light element to this that can be used somewhere else in the city, so that you're creating this sort of remembrance, this design remembrance throughout the city, where you say, oh, that kind of is similar to the thing I saw down the street. And it becomes about placemaking and creating this theme throughout. The very first one on here that I skipped could just be a very simple, using the same design language. We've got all these planters that Cityscape plants every year. Hundreds of people show up downtown to plant in them. Maybe that becomes a standalone element that gets repeated throughout the city in some form or another. And so you've got this mega 6 to 8 foot tall sculptural piece, and then cute little flowers throughout the planters that just call to mind that piece that's a few blocks away, and they intrigue you and make you want to go see it. So we're not including these in this proposal, we're not including these in the budget, but these are things that in the future could be interesting ways to reinterpret, re-examine, or carry the theme throughout other areas of the city. Questions?
With that, we'd like to open up to any questions.
Leslie?
I just I like the last page. It's really, it takes it from being sort of a one-off project to something that permeates the city. But could you talk a little bit more about your main installation and what it does? You said it'll be less active in the winter. Does it have to like rest completely? I mean, is it going to be able to still function when it's freezing and snowing? Or?
Yeah, so I mean, just as you have the snow melt cycle in winter, it's still going to be capturing these waters. And because it's not entirely a closed system, and we talked a little bit about this, the danger of having ice in pipes,
yeah.
But because these are large enough pipes and it's not entirely closed system, as the snow melt occurs on the pads, it's still going to drain
and
into
they're not going to
this.
be pressurized, you know, and that's what you don't want to happen with a pressurized pipe to freeze up because they pop. So we would have to really pay a lot of attention to what the conveyance system is, probably a series of steel pipes and not plastic or any of these other things that we may possibly explore, just so that we have the integrity, of water moving through there, but also the security, because we're going to have quite a few elements. We have to make sure that they're attached well, they don't disappear or anything like that, and they are firmly situated into the ground.
My question was, so you guys don't have a prototype yet,
We don't.
but you must be pretty confident that you're going to be able to figure this out.
Very confident. So there's this grab, and the one image that I did use was from a 3D printing website. And this is one of probably dozens of these mechanical flowers that people have figured out. Now we're looking to combine the opening of the petals with also this articulated stem. So there is some engineering that
So
needs to be resolved.
that's your invention, like that's the ice.
Right.
So this there are examples of this
Yes.
already. out there.
Yeah, and they work in different ways,
Yeah.
but we're confident that the mechanics of it are doable and, given a few weeks of concentrated effort, easy enough. What we do want to avoid is an overly complex system. We want it to be simple mechanics that allows this counterweight, pulls a lever,
Drains.
creates some tension, something very simple. But it is, in fact, something that needs to be engineered.
The lily pad, on the other hand, is just kind of a large surface that just collects water and drains it down.
Yeah, so we had to figure out how much water we thought would come in with a typical storm and start to think about how many gallons and what the weight is here. And we've gone through the numbers. We could go very aggressive with those and collect a lot of water, but then we got to manage all that water. What the main intent is to get this to bloom and then for it to slowly release. So of the water that we're collecting, you don't see it as well in here, but in here we'll probably reestablish the plantings around there so that we get a rain garden up here and then another rain garden down below.
Final question for me. And these is, what is the material of the lily pads?
We think it's going to be a steel frame underneath, and then it's either going to be maybe sheet aluminum or stainless steel on top of that so that we could get the surface area that we need. We got to bend it a little bit so that it can start to concentrate that. But we also want to experiment with the material in terms of the sound that it makes during a rainstorm. So if you're walking through, you kind of hear this pitter-patter there. The bloom may not have happened yet, but you know the bloom is going to happen in time because of that noise.
And are you going to paint it, or are you going to let the aluminum be the aluminum?
I think the aluminum's going to be the aluminum.
Okay.
I think.
So that's.
But we would explore that.
Yeah.
If I was a kid, I would want to get in there and climb around. So I wonder about the accessibility of that space from the steps or from the top of the hill to the bottom.
Because of the nature of the site as it exists, it's already got the rail that sort of prevents you from accessing from the steps. And this wall is relatively high. It's maybe 40 inches, not quite 4 feet. So the hillside's not meant to be accessed already. And I don't know, I wouldn't advise anyone to access it. I mean,
That's a scale, you really
you would have to work to get up there. And I think we would prefer if people weren't hopping
No,
around it.
I'm not suggesting that.
Oh, no, and we
they
kind of
will.
thought about
I'm
that, getting people real
wondering
close,
if-
but we
yeah.
thought that it would be best not to do that.
Yeah. But
Right,
so was your question
no,
just
I
one
agree.
stability?
My question is how can you prevent people?
I think one of the ways they do it right now, especially with the plantings, is they use barberry, which is not a plant that you want to kind of
Okay.
go through very much. So we would, and we've got some of it, you can see it right here, it's this crimson color right there. We would reestablish that and make sure that we're putting some borders and barriers around it.
Any other questions?
There's going to be sort of an Instagram-ishness about this, so that you may want to find a way to let people get close enough to it that they can, kind of, because you want people to promote your project.
Right. The bloom's going to be really close to the curve right there. So we think you'll be able to go up to it, put it about 6 feet or so tall, so that it's kind of moving and you can maybe go underneath it, and then other times it's on top. there.
Good. Yeah, that's a good point.
You included
Make it
also in
easy.
your budget some funding for an interpretive panel or interpretive signage, which I think is a good idea. But I also really like the fact of the project that there's something intuitive about it, that when the flower is, kind of perky, it's because of the water, that, you may not have to explain too much, which is nice, because a lot of times green infrastructure is so complex that people look at it and they don't exactly understand what they're looking at. Where here, it's more understandable. But,
We'll use that money for the interpretive panel. Can say hashtag Floralis Hydrologica, or nobody will ever type that, right? We better come up with a very short hashtag.
But that's the chandelier in Cleveland, right? There's like a place you're supposed to stand to do your.
Right,
Yeah.
So please,
Yeah, put a marker.
H2, yeah, we'll make it simple. H2O.
But I do like that last page where you kind of suggest ways that the same motif could be implemented elsewhere, kind of in the public realm. It's a nice thing that you.
the winter one is especially beautiful, like, 'cause it kind of begins to make you wonder, like, what would be the material that would catch that water, allow it to hold for a second, and then become ice in a very particular shape.
That's kind of how we started
Yeah.
with this,
Yeah.
thinking about more of those issues.
Yeah.
But then try to just get it to a site and keep it to something we can manage for right now.